Can I listen to a podcast?
All right. Welcome to another edition of Middle School Music. I'm one of your hosts, Farhan Lalji, and with me is my colleague and co-host, Daria DeWet. Daria, how you doing this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good, thanks. We have taken the slightly the risk of recording in the afternoon today, even though I still said this morning. So if you notice a change in our tone, please feel free to give us some good feedback on Twitter, Instagram, and wherever else you might find us. It'll be interesting to see how the flow goes, because we are kind of in a slightly different vibe. We've kind of ending up towards the end of our workday rather than the beginning of the day. How are you feeling about this different time of day recording for middle school music?
That's true, but I actually had an interesting meeting today. Talking of Eminem, based on our last episode, today I met the guy who owned The Shelter, which is the original club where Eminem was discovered, where they originally had the rap battles in Detroit, which Proof used to host.
Is that the kind of the story behind the 8 Mile movie?
100%. So not the venue which they used in the movie, because that was a set, the actual shelter where Eminem was discovered. How cool is that?
And what was the context of that? So if you can tell our good listeners anything about what you were meeting him for.
So he's currently starting a new business in the entertainment space, kind of at the intersection of the music industry, photography, and concerts, because he was previously a concert promoter and a venue/club owner in Detroit. And that was kind of how the conversation got started. I was like, no way, that's epic. And we're recording today. So
there you go. Yeah, and speaking of interesting people, and Eminem, last week we were kind of hot on the heels of the Eminem release. This week we had the new surprise in our Spotify of seeing the new Lil Wayne album as well. And I guess we're going to talk about that towards the end of the podcast. But anything you want to share on the Lil Wayne side before we go deep?
It's got interesting features, a bit disappointing on my part. Same length as Music to Be Murdered By, but too many tracks. But we can unpack that later.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about the promotion around it, some of those features, what we think about Lil Wayne as an artist a little bit towards the end of the podcast. Also, speaking of interesting people, we're recording this from our friends at Phoenix Court, which also host Local Globe. One of the interesting things that happened this week was Billie Eilish really kind of racked up the awards at the Grammys, and there is a connection there. Billie Eilish started from an A&R perspective, leveraging the Platoon platform, which was a Local Globe investment that Apple bought, I believe, in 2018. So really interesting to see that kind of connection to where we're recording right now to an artist like Billie Eilish. Any thoughts on that connection or on Billie Eilish?
It's a small world.
It is.
Hey, it's the perfect opportunity to really dig into what we've discussed before, is the epitome of a stadium artist in the new music era, which is a very rare feat in today's new market dynamic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, last week we were talking about Eminem, and there's a lot of history, a lot of kind of ground to cover on the Eminem side. There's probably less kind of ground just from a historical perspective. I mean, Billie Eilish is 18 years old, and Eminem's career is longer than that alone. So it'll be really interesting. But I do think she does deserve a deep dive, and so that's what we're going to give our good listeners today. We're going to go and try to do as much as we can in terms of a deep dive on Billie Eilish.
So let's get to it.
All right. So, Daria, Billie Eilish has been all over the news because she really did kind of wrap up and kind of take over the Grammy Awards. The first artist since Christopher Cross. I think Christopher Cross is probably older than you.
Criss Cross with Jump.
No, not that Chris Cross.
I don't even know who Christopher Cross is.
Christopher Cross. So Christopher Cross, he had...
I was like, how did this guy win so many Grammys? That song sucked.
It's definitely not Jump Jump by Chris Cross. No. Christopher Cross had a song called Sailing, which is actually in one of our earlier episodes. I don't know if you remember, but I talked about yacht rock. Do you remember when I talked about the Doobie Brothers?
Yes, you did.
Yeah,
yes.
So Christopher Cross was part of that genre, and he had a song called Sailing on a self-titled debut. And he really took over the Grammys back in 1981. That was when Christopher Cross had all of his success.
Ah, okay.
So
I learned something new.
that was like Dario minus like what I don't even want to say because I'll feel old. But there you go. So Christopher Cross had a record, for winning all of these exclusive kind of Grammy guilds, or the Grammy Guild in terms of winning I think it was like the 4 general field Grammys they call them, the best song, the best artist, the best record, and yeah, so. He did well. Best pop vocal, I think, is the last one in there. And yeah, and Billie Eilish managed to kind of repeat that feat. The Grammys itself had a little bit of controversy. Actually, had a lot of controversy. My other passion, alongside fintech music, is sport, especially basketball. So we mourned the loss of Kobe Bryant. Some call him a hero. Some call him a human. I say he's somewhere in between. But yeah, I felt that kind of quite closely. And yeah, the Grammys were happened to be in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of Kobe talk as well. And then there's also controversy around some of the award winners as well, right?
Yes. Well, I mean, I'll just say to start off with, it was great that they got Alicia Keys and Boyz II Men together to perform a tribute song to Kobe Bryant. I think overall the Grammys, yeah, to your point, an interesting evening for a variety of reasons. I think it's fantastic that someone like Billie Eilish can collect the big 4.
Yeah.
And there were a couple other artists, newer artists, which also won awards, which weren't necessarily as well publicized because Billie Eilish stole the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean Lizzo for one. I know she's very popular in our house, and she did well on some of the urban categories, and some of the best R&B stuff went to I believe the best R&B album went to Anderson .Paak. So you had some kind of new upcoming other artists as well winning some of those awards.
Yeah, I think, for me, I looked at the best rap album. I see Tyler, the Creator, won that with Igor. I don't know, if I look at the nominees, who was there? There was, Revenge of the Dreamers 3 by Dreamville, that's J. Cole's crew. There's Meek Mill with Championships, 21 Savage, I'm Greater Than I Was, and YBN Cordae, The Lost Boy. He's worked with Dr. Dre. I don't think out of the batch, it's a good signal for what I believe, and I think many do share this online, at least keyboard warriors do, that the music 2018 wasn't a fantastic year. 2019 wasn't a fantastic year for hip hop, at least.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen some kind of some great albums in 2020. Well, at least a lot of press and pub around both the Eminem and the Lil Wayne album. But yeah, 2019 felt like a bit of a quiet year for hip hop. And, some would argue, and I think Tyler would argue this as well, that, I'm not sure if his album was exactly a rap album. And sometimes I wonder if, the people who are in charge of the Grammys are basically slotting artists in where they think they fit, maybe more so, not because of the music, but more so because of their image and who they associate with. And I think that kind of reflects really poorly on the Grammys as an organization. They also have some controversy. I think there's some Me Too stuff happening behind the scenes with some of the older white men who are part of the institution itself. But, I don't think we know enough to go in depth around that topic. But if you're curious, I'm sure a little Googling will get you somewhere on that point. But definitely, I think we're coming to this point where it's really hard to kind of categorize a lot of these urban pop, kind of you're seeing, artists like, or songs like Old Town Road as well, right? Like, where do you slot some of that music in? So it'll be interesting to see if that kind of continues as these genres continue to merge.
Totally. I think someone raised, I can't remember who it was, the notion of using the term urban music and the appropriateness of that in today's modern times.
Yeah, especially as the listeners are probably more suburban than they are urban.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I think we were both kind of really happy to see the success of Billie Eilish. I mean, I know I really kind of rate Billie Eilish as an artist. I really like her story. And it was great to kind of see somebody who is really kind of fresh and new having that kind of success.
Completely. So I think it's a good opportunity to let people know, a bit about her background. What led Billie Eilish to winning 4 Grammys? I think the last female artist of her age to win Grammys, at least that kind of sticks in my mind was Lorde back in 2013, where she won 2 Grammys and has released 3 albums and has been on tour this past year, but has almost I don't know, fizzled out a bit from the spotlight at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think you had other artists probably from the 70s, the 80s. I mean, Madonna kind of started very young. You know, you've got other artists even more recently like Lorde, but also like Lana Del Rey as well, who have kind of had this almost like darkness or dark tone to some of their music, almost haunting. Like I believe one of my friends said that they believe Billie Eilish was kind of like a cross between Marilyn Manson and somebody like PJ Harvey or Fiona Apple, and there's some of that in there, but I don't think it's been taken to this extent, right? I mean, I think previous artists like PJ Harvey, like Fiona Apple, but then more closer to now, like Lana Del Rey, like Lorde, you know, they've tried to kind of break through. I think it's really interesting because I think Billie Eilish comes across as a real kind of genuine kind of artist. You know, she's not kind of like dyeing her hair from blonde to dark to kind of like change some of the image and perception.
Yeah, just like
we don't need to say any names.
I mean,
yeah.
Can I?
No, don't say the name.
Okay.
But I mean, people will know.
There were 2 artists that did that.
Yeah, and it's like I feel like the other thing is, you know, every interview, like, so there's a lot of YouTube clips, like whether it's, you know, what's his name, the James Corden, carpool karaoke stuff, where, you know, she's basically letting him in to her home where her and her brother Phineas have been recording music since they were homeschooled at the start of secondary school. That to me was really kind of interesting to see. You know, he was really influenced by Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours kind of line in Outliers, where kind of that kind of contribution to music is what he's hoping for in terms of Phineas and his production, and letting kind of his sister take a lot of the front line kind of stardom on that since like 2015 or 16 or so, when they got up and started their music career.
Yeah, you know, I like it that you talk about Billie Eilish's image. So, I mean, you know, I guess we'll start from the beginning at some point, but something which I found interesting was when she started to gain some momentum in the public eye, they developed her rollout as an artist, and they took inspiration from the likes of, you know, I'm sure you could it's probably more obvious now, but Travis Scott, Chance the Rapper, etc. And, you know, instead of relying on one big single, they instead try and focus on creating a persona and a distinct aesthetic. And I think that aesthetic, like you pointed out, resonates with the Gen Zs of today. She's very much a figure in that regard, and brings out, you know, the almost the intersection of Travis Scott meets Marilyn Manson meets, I mean, the list goes on, which makes her stand out as an artist. And we've spoken about this time and time again. You know, there are lots of people in the world, not everyone, who can sing, but not many can perform. But then it's about being able to sing and perform and actually have that commercial presence and appeal that makes you distinctive and helps to build that image to get you to where you are. And sure, you know, Eilish had a team behind her that helped her to get there eventually. But no, when she first started off, it was because her and her brother, as a family duo, were able to put really special and good music out there.
Yeah, and also the channels that they were able to use, right? I mean, we talk a lot about artists like Lily Allen kind of being discovered off things like MySpace. And, you know, there's a whole genre of SoundCloud rappers that are getting more kind of notice now, and the whole mumble rap kind of category really kind of grew out of the SoundCloud rapping kind of category. And now what we're seeing is there can be artists, not just kind of SoundCloud rappers, but pure kind of artists who can also use SoundCloud and other platforms. I mean, I think Platoon, which is the British company that was responsible for some of the early A&R around Billie Eilish, was really interesting. And that platform also helped to discover other artists like Stefflon Don, as well as Yeba, I believe, and others as well. So, you know, kind of Billie Eilish starting with Ocean Eyes, you know, as probably like 15, you know, at that point, maybe even 14 or 15 when she wrote that song, putting it out there, getting discovered that way, and almost, you know, this does feel more like an overnight success, even though it is really like 3 years. 3 years relative to some of the other journeys that other artists have had does feel like a lot shorter period between, hey, I'm going to put a song on SoundCloud and I'm going to own the Grammys.
Yeah, because I think she's focused on her craft, and that's the most important part. As cliche as it sounds, people say if you're chasing fame or whatever it may be, and you see that sometimes in the hip hop space, even in the dance music space as well. And I guess the industry climate today can allow for you to have a one-hit wonder. But what was amazing to see was, yes, Eilish releases a Ocean Eyes on SoundCloud, of all places, which is actually a crowded market to begin with.
Totally.
It was like
to get discovered off
SoundCloud.
Yeah.
She's discovered that way. And it's pretty simple, actually. It sounds simpler than it probably was, but Phineas writes and produces a song, which is Ocean Eyes, originally for his band. And then Eilish's dance teacher asked them to write a song for a dance routine. They release Ocean Eyes, and boom. The song starts getting picked up by Beats One, KCRW, BBC One, Zane Lowe, Jason Cromer, Annie Mac, and the list goes on. And boom, your life changes forever. And as you said, at 14 years old.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing was some of the timing, right? Like, so Platoon gets acquired by Apple, and there's an artist like Billie Eilish kind of with Platoon that they can use for some of the early kind of ad campaigns and stuff around kind of some of that artistry, right? I believe that the song Come Out and Play was basically a holiday-themed Apple ad back in 2018. And that was kind of well-timed alongside when they acquired Platoon. So some of these things kind of happen, and then it's like also her getting kind of a song in the Roma soundtrack when I was older, and that song really kind of going alongside the movie. And then kind of the right combinations, right? So I first really kind of, I'd say, falling in love might be a little bit too much, but I really kind of started to dig Billie Eilish in the song she did with Khalid, right? For me, that was the first time where I was like, I think the song's called Lovely, and I was like, oh, who's the female artist? Who's the voice on this track? And that was kind of when I went into the Billie Eilish rabbit hole and really started to dig in, and then kind of to see other artists collaborating with her and covering her. I mean, now you see CNCO doing a cover of Bad Guy, and you see, I believe it's Alicia Keys doing a cover of Ocean Eyes as well. And so for somebody that young to have such an impact where you can get a Latin boy band and a classic R&B queen alongside a collaboration with the new upcoming R&B artists like Khalid, as well as a feature from Justin Bieber, all within like 2 years, I think it's incredible.
I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Go on.
We spoke about Halsey last week. Halsey's been around for a long time. If you had to put the two side by side, do you see them competing in the same space? Do you see them as complementary, maybe doing a song together? It's a bigger question. I don't know.
I think we do this a lot with female artists, a lot more so than we maybe do it with male artists, where we almost feel like you have to kind of like compare and contrast, and it's almost like a battle right between them. And it's like, I think there's
Biggie and Tupac.
Sure. I mean, yeah, and rap maybe, and maybe it's in the rap category as well. But I just feel like when I think back to, kind of my childhood, you had Madonna and you had Cyndi Lauper, and they were very different artists. They had very different crafts. They were really kind of focused on their own kind of lane. And I think a world could exist where somebody could be both a Madonna fan and a Cyndi Lauper fan. And I think that's kind of carried on, right? I mean, I don't necessarily see them competing for the same audience. But that being said, there's nothing stopping you from having a playlist with both Halsey and having some Billie Eilish tracks on that as well.
For sure. Couldn't agree more. I think something to point out, though, which is a trend which we've spoken about before, is as soon as Eilish wins these awards, all of a sudden the next day, her catalog of albums and song sales got up 109% compared to January 25th, which was the day before. Her first two album sales got up 46%, and her song download sales increased by 127%. It's just the power of these award shows still exists even in the year 2020.
Yeah, the bump is definitely there, right, from the Grammys. I mean, whether or not you think these awards have as much relevance as they had 20 years ago, and if you can draw the direct correlation between kind of artists winning awards and their uplift in music. And it's interesting to see how much the PR angle, how much the TV angle kind of plays a role in that, right? Because other artists might have won some of the smaller category awards, but those, if they're not kind of celebrated on the main TV show, they might not get the same kind of level of bump that an artist like Billie Eilish or even somebody like Lizzo gets because of their performing on the show. I believe Ariana Grande also performed. It'd be interesting to see some of those other artists that performed, how their kind of back catalog streams might have grown over January, February, compared to some of the artists who maybe won awards that weren't televised. It'll be really interesting to see if we can kind of dig into the data and then kind of categorize and say, actually, if you appear, even if you don't win an award, but you do a performance that's actually televised, does that impact you more than actually winning an award?
Yeah, completely. Because then we'll be able to determine, is it from the news and PR online, or is it because of viewership? Something to also point out though is that Phineas, which is Billy's brother, he also won 2 awards that evening. He won the Producer of the Year award and the Best Engineered Album Non-Classical for When We Fall Asleep. Wow, they dominated.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting on that as well, because I think the whole Phineas and Billie Eilish story is one that I'm really fascinated in that here is a brother and sister duo who obviously have a lot of love. You know, they're your classic kind of brother and sister who probably fight quite a bit, but whatever, but we're homeschooled together and are really, really supportive of each other's career. Phineas likes to kind of hang out in the background, creates great music, and is really happy, at least as the way it seems, for his sister to take a lot of the spotlight. Billie Eilish has a song, I believe it's called I Look Good in the Crown. And it's really interesting that the message behind that is a little bit about her being like a king, not a queen, not a princess, but her being a king and her being up front. And it's a really interesting dynamic between her and her brother in that she feels like the one in front and he feels like the one behind, right? And in the same way that you have a lot of relationships that kind of almost like glorify the male and kind of ignore the female behind the male, in this relationship, it feels like Billie Eilish is definitely up front. And I'm really glad that we're now in this place where you can have this brother and sister duo, and it's not like other husband and wife duos or other brother and sister duos in the past, where it's almost like the brother has come to the front, right? Like whether it was the Jacksons, whether it was the, oh God, I don't even want to say it because it'll make me feel old, but like Sonny and Cher, the Oswalds, all of these like old time.
Sonny and Cher.
Yeah, like all of these like 60s, 70s, 80s, where they were brothers and sisters. I mean, you look at like Michael and Janet, Michael was definitely up front and Janet had to claw her way kind of through. And it's really interesting for me to see the sister being the celebrity, being the star, being up front, and the brother kind of being behind the scenes, kind of creating some of the music that the sister is kind of taking a lot of credit for.
Yeah, but something to highlight though is that something we didn't mention is that, Eilish made history as the first woman to ever win in all 4 categories.
Definitely. And I think she's breaking a lot of these barriers, right? She's also going to be the youngest artist to ever do the new James Bond song or a James Bond track.
Yes.
And I think that this new I'm really kind of looking forward to this James Bond movie, not just because it's the last in this, I think, kind of really great kind of series with Daniel Craig as James Bond, but also it's got Fleabag's Phoebe Waller-Bridge doing a lot of the writing. You've got Billie Eilish doing the main song. So it's almost like, you've got 2 really relevant, 2 really kind of creative individuals, both on the writing side and on the music side. So I'm really kind of looking forward to that. The other thing that I was going to say about Billie Eilish that's got me kind of pumped is, we're seeing a lot of like rock and roll or, kind of artists like Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters and Nirvana actually commenting on Billie Eilish because they're taking their daughters to these concerts. And so their daughters at like 13, 14, 15 years old are influencing them. And it was really funny that Dave Grohl got caught up in some controversy a while back when he compared Billie Eilish to Nirvana. And a lot of kind of the Nirvana fans were up in arms. And he had to clarify and say, no, what he meant was actually her impact on actual culture in terms of how fans were reacting to her in the moment, having gone and experienced a Billie Eilish concert as a concert goer, was kind of giving him that reflection on how time had kind of told the story of what it was like to be part of Nirvana. So I was really interested in that kind of like reflection. Here's somebody who was in, two of the biggest like rock and roll bands ever, both Nirvana and the Foo Fighters, and now kind of also kind of caught up in the whole Billie Eilish side of things as well, and watching that from the side.
The debate, yeah, that's really interesting actually, because rock and roll is such a defining era in the music industry overall. And I think Billie Eilish, this era right now, is a defining moment for the new era of music and what it represents for artists moving forward in terms of career development, as well as how fans interpret, digest, and I would say reflect or project off these artists as well.
It's interesting, right? Like, I mean, the classification of Billie Eilish as a pop artist, and then drawing reflections on like Marilyn Manson, who you would not call a pop artist, right? But you can definitely see the lines if you're kind of paying attention on how one artist influences another from at least a style perspective or a perception perspective as well.
I wonder if moving forward, if the Gen Zs of today look at or read articles or view TikTok videos or consume Instagram content or whatever it is that shows Eilish winning these awards, and use that as motivation to say, hey, I can also be a bedroom artist and become, mainstream. Or whether it's a simple case of, oh, that's just a pipe dream. The market is too crowded now. She did it in 2015 when SoundCloud was less kind of congested. SoundCloud was less crowded, and it had more financial upside.
I don't know. I think good music will kind of float to the top. Artists who are pure artists will kind of get discovered in some way, I hope. This might be kind of the optimist in me speaking, but like when you've got an artist who also uses kind of tools like Fruit Loops and stuff, who can kind of get discovered and then put their music out, or you have like platforms where people can put out beats and other people can comment and kind of react to those, and you can gain popularity through even your production on that side. What's the name of the African artist who's really kind of collaborating with a lot of Western artists right now? Burna Boy, that's it. So Burna Boy does this great kind of, now is kind of doing this great album, has so many collaborations with artists from the West, is featuring on
with Saeed.
Yeah, is featuring with like Ed Sheeran and Stormzy and all of this as well. And Burna Boy was, kind of able to just use Fruit Loops and create his own music and also get discovered in a similar way that Phineas and Billie Eilish were in their bedroom. So I think part of it is that you can still have these bedroom artists. And I think the level of quality, you don't need to be in a studio. You don't need to have all of this really expensive music to create. So I think we're just at the start of how creative this sector is going to get, based on kind of like these bedroom artists who are able to leverage technology that's a lot more accessible than it was even as much as 10 years ago.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know Drake tends to record while he's on tour. I know Scorpion, large proportion of Scorpion was recorded that way, and I'm sure many other artists do the same. However, I will say, though, that when you listen to something like a Dr. Dre album, very much ingrained in the craft of the old school craft, you can hear the nuances in the way that the songs are produced. However, it really does come down to mastering. Mm-hmm. And so I think all of that aside, if you have somebody who's good at mastering, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see, like, as we've kind of said a couple times, Billie Eilish is really young, right? She's 18 years old. She's just really at the start. I mean, this is, other than her first EP, which had like Ocean Eyes and stuff, this is her first proper studio album. Even if the studio is the home studio, the mastering is probably happening somewhere else. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of decisions she makes, if she does the reinvention. I really am kind of drawing parallels to artists like Madonna and Cher. Speaking of Sonny and Cher earlier, really dating myself now, around these artists who recreated or reinvented themselves. It'll be really interesting to see if, similar to Madonna, who did the dance phase, who had True Blue, who had, kind of Living on a Prayer. All of these songs had a very different kind of Madonna from a, kind of perception perspective, from a style perspective, from a presentation perspective. And the music was good throughout. It'll be really interesting to see if Billie Eilish and Phineas take that kind of tone. And, if we're seeing the more dark side now, the more brooding teenager, what she's like as a 21-year-old, what she's like as a 25-year-old, what she's like as a 30-year-old. I'm really kind of keen to see that artist kind of evolution in Billie Eilish.
Completely. I mean, what the most equivalent artist that started at a young age in recent times is probably Justin Bieber, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good one. I mean, Bieber now has been going for, like 12 years?
I mean,
Baby came out, I believe, in like 2008, 2009.
Yeah, you're right. And, talking of Justin Bieber, they've just released the Seasons documentary talking about how he's getting back on the road and all of his personal challenges. I think, talking of the evolution of an artist, that Purpose album was damn good.
Yeah.
That was 5 years ago, but a lot of that is attributable to Pooh Bear as a writer.
Yeah, totally.
I think if I listened to he released a new track yesterday.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, dude, I really don't like his new stuff.
I know. Even my household, which are ardent kind of Bieber fans, they are not fans of Yummy at all. I don't think they've heard the new one yet. So it'll be interesting to see if that changes their mind. But it's funny because like Billie Eilish, the bad guy remix with Justin Bieber. There's a story behind that around when she spotted Justin Bieber at a concert. There's a great YouTube clip if you've got a spare like a minute to spend on YouTube, where you can see Billie Eilish's reaction to just seeing Justin Bieber and giving him a big hug. And you can just see and feel that there's true fandom there. And it's so interesting to kind of capture that, one artist being a fan of another artist and that interaction. And now it'll be interesting to see how Billie Eilish's career kind of definitely evolves, because you probably see a lot less Justin Bieber in her presentation than you do kind of your PJ Harveys or your Marilyn Mansons.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see as she grows, as she evolves, does she kind of change her style? Does she change the way she presents music? Does she do a dance album? Does she do kind of lean in and do more rock-ish kind of elements as well? And I guess some of that is due to Phineas's production. It'll be interesting to see if she and Phineas kind of continue that collaborative relationship, or if she'll explore really kind of maybe doing albums separately, right? Like, I mean, the history of music is littered with, artists who work with producers early on, separate from those producers, go different ways, find other producers to collaborate with, possibly come back, possibly not. It'll be interesting to really observe whether or not Phineas and Billie Eilish continue their collaboration relationship.
I guess the bigger question on, do you continue to use the formula if it isn't broken, or do you spice things up? And you've seen this with many artists before. And I mentioned last week, there's rumor that Kendrick Lamar is looking at rock influences for his latest album, which is supposedly being released in the first half of this year. Phineas released an EP last year called Blood Harmony, and his first official single was Shelter, which was released at the end of September in 2019. I think you'll have, ideally, it would be great to see the two continue.
Yeah.
I wonder if family jealousies will get in the way. But I also think that such an achievement, such as the one that Billie and her brother together have achieved, is going to encourage many producers, and I guess those who are very greedy in those industries as well, to try and get involved. Greed aside, let's just focus on the creative side for now. You may have many producers that are well respected, which maybe Eilish has always dreamed of working with, who may knock on her door. And we've seen that with other artists, and sometimes it's worked very well, and other times it's failed miserably.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. Like my kind of like haphazard prediction would be that Billie Eilish and Phineas take a break, right, from each other. Like Billie does probably experiment with other producers. Phineas does release more music on his own, working with other producers, and then they'll probably like intersect again at some point. At least that's my hope, because it'll be interesting to see, that journey kind of progress over time, and just see like how much those collaborations today, kind of what we look at, how we look at those collaborations in 10 years' time.
Yeah, I was just thinking now, like, doesn't Billie Eilish kind of remind you of the less bubblegum version of Lady Gaga? Like the real version. Like this is me, and I'm a woman and this is how I want to be in today's world, and screw all the people around me that are trying to dictate or jam specific stereotypes down my throat, because that's what led to Gaga's downfall.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting one, right? Like, I mean, I think Lady Gaga was a really interesting, creative artist. I mean, her voice, like just with the piano and Lady Gaga, is insane. But she went into some really kind of weird places. I mean, you look at the meat dress and all of these kind of things that Lady Gaga did.
Meat dress.
Yeah, man.
Was there an argument between Eilish and Gaga about the meat dress because Eilish is vegan or something?
Possibly. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, but I think, like, you know, the fans don't necessarily overlap as much as we'd like them to, because I do think they're both great female artists, and I think, you know, kind of Gaga's a great one to look at because her most recent stuff in terms of her movie career and her songs from that movie, you know, that's a very different kind of Lady Gaga to the Lady Gaga that emerged almost kind of from the paths of Madonna, right? Like, I think the Madonna to Lady Gaga lineage is definitely linear, whereas the Madonna to Billie Eilish lineage is almost in parallel, right? Like, you're looking at artists kind of starting off really, really early, but very differently. Whereas like Lady Gaga, you can draw a direct parallel or direct line and say, actually, you can totally see the Madonna influence in Lady Gaga.
Yeah. In Lady Gaga or Billie Eilish?
In Lady Gaga. Madonna, you can definitely see. Like, Lady Gaga taking her fashion risks, taking even her musical choices. Like, the New York scene is very different to the LA scene.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So Billie Eilish kind of coming up from the LA scene, you almost see more of like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the Marilyn Mansons, the Nirvana on the West Side,
Definitely.
West Coast.
West Side?
Yeah. Whereas like with Lady Gaga, you know, she's a New York club girl. And Madonna also was a New York club girl. So you see a lot more of the direct relationship on that side. But I mean, it's really interesting that, you know, that again, kind of like these female artists are kind of pitted against each other.
Yeah.
You know, and you see it as well with Taylor Swift and Katy Perry as well in the past, and they got to kind of squash that beef, I hope. But you wonder if like the fans of the artists are kind of almost making this a bigger deal than the artists themselves are making it. So on that great note, I think that's probably exhausted as far as we can go with Billie Eilish, but we definitely are both kind of looking out to kind of see what Eilish does next and how her career evolves.
What is she going to do next? Who knows? But what we do know is that we've put together a playlist this week focusing on Billie Eilish's biggest hits. So if you've never heard of her and would like to know more about her, check out the middle school playlist. We had one last week with Eminem. Thank you for the feedback. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it.
There's some collabos. There's some covers as well as some of the tunes from Billie Eilish that we both really liked over the last couple of years.
So on that note, talking about music, what about new music, Farhan? What are you listening to?
You know, I have spent the morning and most of the day trying to digest the new Lil Wayne album.
It's called The Funeral. I think there's a reason why, because you might die listening to it.
Unfortunately, I have to say I'm not a big fan of this album. I mean, you know, kind of I have been a fan of Lil Wayne in the past, but this album I feel really let me down.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where that came from. There was zero promotion behind it. It's got features on it, but the songs are poor. I think it should have just been thrown in the bin. I mean, if there was a traditional label, the A&R would not have let this fly. There's no way that anybody would have let that album come out. But this is typical Wayne fashion. Some people love it, and I'm sure loyalists will turn around and say, it's great, and you two don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. But I guess I'm glad I'm not a Lil Wayne loyalist then. But I think even with the Carter 5, we've seen that he just has too much filler and maybe needs to start going back to the drawing board and putting something more cohesive out there. Who knows? Maybe this wasn't meant to be a commercial release to the extent that we're interpreting it as, and it was more rather meant to be something that was just put out there, almost in the sense that it was like a mixtape.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, though, I do feel like it's overshadowing what looks like, you know, a decent week of new music. So there's new Daddy Yankee tracks. There's, as you mentioned earlier, the new Justin Bieber kind of track as well. It'll be interesting to see when that album. Do we have an album release?
Valentine's Day.
Ah, great. So looking forward to hearing. Hopefully the rest of the album is better than the two tracks we've heard so far from the Biebs. But yeah, new Dua Lipa, new Taylor Swift. I actually really like the Boogie with a Hoodie new track called King of My City. I really enjoyed that track that I kind of got to listen to this morning before I realized there was a new Lil Wayne album that kind of took over.
Do you know what you could or should listen to is actually the Game of Thrones soundtrack. Now, they never put any commercial attention on the soundtrack itself. However, there's a great track there with SZA, The Weeknd, and Travis Scott called Power is Power. And the soundtrack itself is sequenced very well. There are songs from the likes of Ellie Goulding, the Ex-Ambassadors, A$AP Rocky and Joey Badass, James Arthur, Rosalia, Mumford & Sons, The Lumineers, Lil Peep, Ty Dolla $ign, Matt Bellamy, and the list goes on. So very interesting mix of people, but very well sequenced. And if you about to jump onto your Friday commute, well, actually, it's not Friday when you listen to this. So whenever you listen
your
to
Monday morning
your
commute,
Monday morning
probably.
commute, that's what it is. Then, or you want to get over those Sunday blues before work tomorrow, then take a listen.
There's also, I just discovered a new track with Lil Nas X featuring Nas called Rodeo. So
Nas Squared.
Exactly, Nas Squared. So I'm interested to see how that track plays out. Haven't listened to it yet, but it's probably something I'm going to be checking out on my commute home on Friday.
I've listened to it. I've listened to all three versions of that song, right? So there was the original, which had no features. Then he threw Cardi B on the track and put that out on the EP, which I guess made sense because she was all the rage.
Sure.
The Nas track I way prefer. I feel like production-wise, they've increased the production value. It sounds a bit more polished, and I prefer it. But
so there you go. So there is some decent music to listen to.
It's not all doom and gloom or funeral orientated. Thanks to Lil Wayne.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to draw a close to this casket that is this podcast, this episode at least. Thanks again for listening to Middle School Music. You can find us on Twitter at middleschool_music. That's at MDLSKL_music. You can find me on Twitter at Farhan Lalji. Dario, where can the good listeners find you?
Good listeners, you can find me on at Dario_Devet with a W.
With a W? Is it really with the W?
With a W.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you guys soon.
Ciao.
Can I listen to your podcast?